Hello, and welcome to the Launchpad Podcast, a podcast where we highlight change agents that are moving the envelope forward in how drugs and devices are promoted and how healthcare evolves itself in the new normal. We have a big announcement today. As you may have heard and read, ACTO has acquired Scrimmage. And with that, we have a very special guest today, Derek Lundsten, CEO of Scrimmage, and now my colleague and an ever dear friend. We'll talk to Derek about his journey as a CEO and how Scrimmage pioneered mobile learning in the life sciences industry. And as we all know, education plays a very special role in life sciences, and life sciences plays a very special role in healthcare. I can't wait till we get started and hear from Derek all the wonderful things that he's learned over the last 10 years in how training has evolved in the life sciences industry and how technology has played a key role and continues to play a key role in the future forward. So with that, Derek, welcome to Launchpad, and so great to have you here with us and wearing the ACTO jersey.
Thank you, Parth. It's an honor and humbling to be both with you here and in general as we start to build this next version of our combined company. It's very exciting. And congratulations to you and the entire ACTO team and the leadership team on this next milestone. It's very, very exciting.
And to you as well, Derek. I've been a big fan for a very long time, and I'm so thrilled that we're working together now in moving the industry forward, and as we're calling it, the powerhouse of life sciences learning. So,
Absolutely.
Derek, to start things off, would love to hear your story. I know every entrepreneur has that amazing, interesting, unique story. Would love for our audience to hear it.
Well, there's so many places to go with that, but I'll start just with Scrimmage specifically and just how Scrimmage came to be. So obviously about 10 years ago, the world was changing and the iPad first came to market, and many of our clients, big pharmaceutical, biotech, med device companies went out and saw this opportunity to change how they communicated with physicians. And they said, we want to get more time in front of these doctors, in front of these HCPs. Let's give these iPads to our representatives. It's a nice shiny tool that will get us more face time, more screen time. And myself, my partners at the time, we saw this opportunity in the market that they were going to need to populate these devices with apps, with content. And so at the time, Scrimmage, the idea behind Scrimmage was born, and it started in a few different versions. So Casey was a friend of mine, former partner, and others along the way that we kind of saw, hey, we're going to build apps. And that was kind of the app proliferation started back in that window. And it was at that point that we said, hey, there's an opportunity to build a platform around learning and development. And so with that context, we built a platform that was designed to educate sales reps as they went in front of HCPs. And funny enough, when we went to a lot of these pharmaceutical companies, they kind of looked at us like we were a bunch of kids. They said, oh, we've been complaining about our LMS for years, and we've been using all these tools that we've been complaining and telling you guys how they're not meeting our needs. And now you guys have kind of built this platform, but we're really not ready yet for that. It's just too far ahead. We've invested a lot of time, a lot of money in our existing technology. And so what we did is we went to the marketing teams of a few early adopter clients, and we convinced them that, hey, you're spending a fortune on these national sales meetings and PAs, printing binders and resources that get left behind or not used. Your time in delivering content for your CMR or LMR press. Why don't you move it over to this mobile app? And we basically became one of the very first meeting apps. And so we launched the meeting apps with these companies, and sure enough, training and development kind of got a little jealous and said, hey, we want this application now. That's our learning app. And so it kind of came back full circle that L&D started using the platform as it was intended. And then fast forward a few more years, as more and more companies and more partners started using the technology, many of our clients were in different companies, and they started experimenting with integrating it into their existing learning management systems, or even at certain companies replacing it with their learning management systems. And that's really how we continue to grow the company. So over the last decade, we've had the opportunity to work with many players and leaders in the healthcare industry and really help support them as they've evolved and gone through their own digital transformation journeys. And we've had a chance to learn right along with them. It's been a really exciting ride and a lot of fun. And that's kind of tees up how you and I came together. Is I got to see the ACTO team, about 5 years ago, come onto the market with a very similar idea of how do we change how people are educated, and building what I saw at the time was the next generation of a mobile platform. And I've seen you guys just continue to build and grow and innovate over the last few years. And I said to myself, this is the kind of company that I want to work with as we look at the next chapter. And sure enough, Parth, you were very humble in reaching out to me, and vice versa. We said, hey, why don't we start talking about what this can look like? And it takes a lot of self-awareness on the part of an entrepreneur to kind of lead in and say, how can we partner? And so I'm really appreciative that you did that, and that we're both at a point where we could take that next step in the growth journey.
Yes, definitely, Derek. It was it's been my honor and pleasure, and it's been so exciting just talking about what's next. Essentially, the whole code is being rewritten right now. How life sciences companies promote, and more specifically, how do they educate and engage their key stakeholders, whether it's sales reps, HCPs, or patients. So tons of work for us to do. One thing that really catches my attention when, Derek, I hear the story of Scrimmage and another stripe in your serial entrepreneur badge of honor, which is just the leaning into the macro trends where there's seismic shifts that happen around us, and innovation is being able to cut through the change blindness and to be able to see the change. I find that fascinating. Derek, when you look around, what's your spidey senses telling you now? What's the seismic shift today that you're seeing?
Well, so two things. One, I think that's where it got exciting for you and I to collaborate, because I saw that we both saw the emerging trend around data, around artificial intelligence, and around how those two elements are converging to provide a more personalized education and training experience, right? So that was what I would say was the shift that was happening 2 years ago, which is now maturing, and we're very much in this stage of that is becoming where we're going. And I think the macro shift that's happened in the last 6 months with the pandemic and everyone going to a true work from home, virtual work, virtual education, virtual communication, virtual selling, and needing to measure the success and time investment that people are making in those areas, and then tie that data set across different parts of the business. That's the whole piece that we're talking about just from the commercial part of life sciences. Then you take it a step further with the whole omni-channel approach that you've talked about, which is how do you tie this to patients, how do you tie it to providers, to payers, and the commercial piece, so you have the full life cycle of data portability, tools integration, and that personalized journey across those different stakeholders. And so I see this is where the whole 1 + 1 = 3.0 that we've talked about, the version 3 of the market that your vision is set, that we aligned on, is how do we take it forward? And I think that's where I see it going, is that personalized learning tied in with the tools and to create a learning journey throughout the stakeholder model is where healthcare is moving. And that's going to only change now to patients having more ownership of their own healthcare continuum, their own data, their own experience. And that's, again, going to provide another feedback loop back to our commercial life sciences companies that we partner with. So
yeah, Derek, that is so fascinating. I love that. I almost imagine a coin with two sides, where you have the user experience on one side and data on the other side. And it's, companies like Google and Amazon, they figured that out. They follow our eyeballs and they see what we're drawn to. They make the experiences sticky, and then they use that data to drive their commercial strategy. And it's very it's the same idea. Going back to the macro trends for a second, it's so interesting. Again, you mentioned how iPad laid the foundation and gave you the platform on which there was this proliferation of the applications. It's interesting, fast forward from when Scrimmage started 5 years downstream, when ACTO starts to emerge, there's too much proliferation where there's so many different applications and the sales reps don't know where to go find their messaging and the training. And we emerge from that consolidation, right? Yeah. It's the bundling and unbundling, two forces of business. And on the other side of that bundling is just so much data capabilities, as you mentioned. I find that fascinating, Derek, just how the technology has evolved. And then the future is even further consolidation. And in that spirit, here's one thing that I'd love to get your take on. It's I keep hearing the notion of breaking down silos. We need to be more efficient in this new normal. What are your thoughts on that? You've worked with so many different functional areas. Like you said, the whole value chain. You have, you and the Scrimmage team have worked with them. Why is it important now? What are these silos, and why are they important that they be broken down today?
So it goes back to the value chain, and it goes back to the other big macro trends I think you and I align on, which is the role of what I'll call the quote unquote consumer that exists both in consumer purchasing, like how you mentioned Google and Amazon and others. That's a whole different world, but it's also changing how we transact in the B2B world. And so there's an expectation by end users and patients that for us to get closer to the end user. So within our clients, the commercial, pharmaceutical, biotech, med device companies, when you look at market access, when you look at marketing, when you look at reimbursement, you look at patient education, when you look at sales, they're all needing to align on that value creation, which is how do you get closer to the end users, right? And even now with physicians, they're playing that role neither. Even with what's happened over the last 6 months with telehealth, we're just changing the entire relationship with how closely we're literally moving into people's homes, right? We're having this conversation in our living room. And so this shift that's happening around that personalization and how you build, back to what we're going to talk about a little bit later, trust at a consumer level between organizations and then the different stakeholders along those lines, that's really where I see a lot of this moving. And I think that goes back to the need to break down silos, because it's about the flow of information, right? It's about the flow of information and how do you design what's valuable based on that flow. And I think that the companies that are getting smarter and adapting to that and really working to be close to that, their end stakeholders, we're seeing them winning, right? We're seeing the people that can move quickly and adapt. They're winning in the marketplace. And I think that's a real shift. It's going to accelerate now. And I think that to that point, we're going to see new players into the market that have never been here before. I mean, you look at digital therapeutics companies that are now coming into the space where we're bringing therapies and apps together for tracking and for metrics and for all those different pieces. That's happening, but also companies that have never been in healthcare before, like we already talked about, Amazon and Google and other multinational companies are going to get into the healthcare industry. I mean, it's almost crazy when you think about it. The Kodak got into this whole thing around coronavirus. I mean, like players, incumbents, and new organizations are going to emerge because of this need, and they're going to find the convergence points between consumers and our products. That's my personal feeling.
Yeah, that's really powerful, Derek. Essentially, kind of applying that mindset to B2B SaaS, as you mentioned, software and applications. It essentially is consumerization of that experience, just the way there's consumerization of other aspects of the value chain. And I love what you said, getting closer to the end user. And I find that fascinating when we think about life sciences tech stack, because, and it again goes back to us being in the middle of these big macro shifts that are happening around us. When we look at the story of Veeva, for example,
yes,
and I call it the first wave of digital transformation in life sciences is you go from on-premise applications to on cloud, and Veeva obviously spearheaded that and cracked open that vertical within life sciences, that software category. Now, in my view, the next wave of digital transformation is engagement. It's how do you consumerize the user experience of those cloud applications and make it more consolidated and richer and stickier. How does that line up with what the conversations that you've been having with folks in the industry?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Parth. I mean, I think that you now have entire innovation teams in these companies that they're asking those questions, right? I mean, and even to the point of just, let's use something simple, social media, right? That was never, even that is a way that now people are interacting with patients that was never before. And just education. As patients, we have more responsibility, or more opportunity, I should say, to take responsibility for how we are interacting with our HCPs and with these companies. And so we're totally in sync on that's where it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. And Derek, where do the field teams fall into this mindset of expectation? Like, what are they expecting from their organizations today?
Well, my sense is that they are also expecting this adaptability for lack of a better term, from these organizations. They need to move quickly. They're seeing these different, reimbursement on a geo area and access, and now without having actually physical access, but digital access, that's changing all of it. So companies are being forced to change how they communicate with HCPs, the tools they use, the metrics they use to track them, the messaging around those, and we're able to actually see in real time how people are responding and what's working in a way, because it's all digital, we can actually collect that metadata in a way that's totally, what we could not measure before, we now can, or we're going to be able to in the near term future. And so there's going to be a request from field teams and an expectation from corporate on how to make that relationship work more effectively. And there's two schools of thought on that. I believe you'll have more reps at some level that will be out there because they're going back to the old days of getting market share and getting share of voice, right? They're going to want to get out there because they're going to need that. At the same time, there's going to be more what I'll call surgical or precision teams that are going to be working with these customers to really move them and to maximize their time. So I think you're going to see different levels almost again of field-facing teams that are working different skills, that are appealing different audiences in that value chain. That's what I personally see. We'll see if that comes true or not.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing that catches my attention, Derek, when I hear that is maximizing the time, right? So sales folks and sales reps, when they're in front of the healthcare providers, it's maximizing that opportunity. Why is that? Why do you think that is becoming more important now?
Well, I think it goes back to consumerization. There's so much more information available online, right, on our computers, through our phones, through these apps, that a lot of the work that people can do before they actually have a quote unquote sales conversation is done, even by HCPs. And so I actually think we're going to see more and more personalized marketing to practices, to institutions. You're going to see a different approach, I believe, in terms of how these companies are targeting, messaging, and tracking the pull through within these accounts. It goes back to what we talked about early on the omni-channel. Like, how do you tie learning, coaching, messaging, communication, and tie that all back into their CRM? That's really where I see the value chain continuing to grow. And so I do think we're going to see new commercial models emerge, because I don't think we're going to go back to business the way it was 12 months ago. There will be some new format of how we communicate. Because I can say personally, and we talked about this before privately, I spent 10 years traveling all over the country, and I'm getting more done working on Zoom and being around my family than I was before. And I'm sure that a lot of executives in healthcare, but even on our position level, are seeing this too. And so people are re-examining not just their work habits, but their life habits and how they manage their time. And so there's a whole new series of questions that are emerging around that. And so how do you work within what I'll call a 24/7 access cycle to information? And the rules of what work is going to be are going to change as well, as more and more remote work policies are happening, and there's more flexible schedules for everyone. That's going to be about how do you align schedules to gain that. So I think and there's going to be whole new employment categories, frankly, created through that, right? Around time optimization, energy flow optimization. That's whole separate from our tactical discussion, but I think there's going to be a whole other part of business that will emerge through looking at optimizing human performance relative to commercialization.
Derek, I love that. Zooming out, I'm thinking more personalization, more consumerized experiences, and going back to the discussion of what does the future of work look like, and the future of the relationship with, for example, healthcare provider and the sales rep look like. Mm-hmm. There will be, what we're hearing is a lot of healthcare providers want to see sales reps less, right? And making sure that that window of opportunity that they get, they're even more prepared, especially to your point, healthcare providers, they have direct channels now to get that information, which is interesting because it also poses a great opportunity for pharma and device companies, not only to build those virtual connections with the HCPs directly, but also to make sure that the sales reps are fully enabled and engaged and prepared when they do show up in front of the customers.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back to my imagination is that physicians will have the opportunity to quote unquote call up their team, right? They'll be able to phone a friend, right? So instead of having they'll actually be able to do more direct outreach to the company teams. They'll have special teams dedicated to parts of the business that'll be kind of in that format. That's what I think is going to be part of the evolution.
Derek, you mentioned 1 + 1 = 3.0. I love for our listeners to know more what's behind that. But if you don't mind coloring in, what is this 1 + 1 = 3.0?
Absolutely. Well, I think it goes back to the one being Scrimmage with our decade of relationships experience and pioneering of the market. The other one being ACTO's disruptive technology team and vision that we both kind of align on and we've been talking about in the session. And the 3.0 is the fact that we're launching a product that actually addresses the omni-channel and capabilities we just talked about around personalization, around AI, around omni-channel, and tying in the data sets across the value chain for businesses. And I think that I can say for you, humbly, you guys have built an amazing roadmap that we are now coming along on the journey and combining to reach a worldwide market. I mean, with our combined team of people, with our expertise technically and in the industry, we are unrivaled in terms of how we can bring value and bring future innovation to the marketplace. And I think that that's an incredibly exciting opportunity and something that should be exciting to our partners and potential partners that we look forward to talking about shortly. I think that's the basis of it. I mean, what 3.0 will accommodate in terms of the integration across the business units from sales to marketing to market access, and not just training, but also messaging, coaching, and the pull through with the end customers themselves. I think that even Diva should be watching us.
Derek, and I say this this part humbly for you is just bringing that decade-long experience and injecting that into a powerful tech stack is just phenomenal. And I think, what are we at? About a dozen applications that we can now cut out and consolidate, which means 12 times more stickiness for the users, 12 times more data. And that's just for the sales channel and the field channel. And then, to quote one of the customers is, this allows you to be future forward, where as things evolve and we go into the new normal, we add HCP channel and we add patients and all of that through one central platform and command center for the chief commercial officer. I think that's really fascinating. We're super excited as well that we can now build something to market for the chief commercial officer to starburst the clinical story into the market and drive pull through on the brand strategies.
And what I would say is to listeners and viewers, the market's already responding. I mean, in the last couple of meetings we had, even today, to use exact quotes, disruptively awesome, right? Was one of the quotes that I heard from a senior leader today, talking about what we're doing, and that we're going to be literally, that sounds game changing in terms of what we're bringing in terms of the learning and engagement space. So hats off to the entire team and what the team's doing under your leadership, Parth. And I think it's really, really exciting for the market.
Thank you, Derek, and I really mean it. Couldn't do it without you. So one of the last things, Derek, that I wanted to talk about is sort of the trifecta of when we look, change is hard, right? Transformation is difficult. When we look at the most successful change management programs, there are a few elements that I've seen in my experience that are common elements. Before I share my response, I want to defer to you and hear from you in the 10 years that you've seen life sciences leaders and educational leaders really knock it out of the park.
Yeah.
What kind of the traits that you see consistently come up?
Yeah. So number one is paint the picture of the compelling future that brings the people to focus their energy and their efforts and their skills together. So where are we going and where are we taking the market, literally in a positive way? That's the first step, so that everyone understands where are we converging. And then it goes back to what are the values, what are the foundational points, what are the core elements of the businesses that we bring together to amplify each other, right? How do we make each other better? How do we not just add to each other, but multiply each other, right? And to bring that to help us move further along and faster along that journey to that compelling future. And then I think it's about celebrating the people, right? Make sure that everyone on that journey knows that they individually are playing a key role in that meshing of the culture, of the values, of the skills, of the resources, and building together where that's going. And I think that's also separate from what we're talking about in tech. That's an exciting part of demonstrating what a combined team and culture can look like in the market. And so I think that's, and then really continuing to message and support people in that way. And I think you're well positioned to lead that.
Thank you, Derek. And I love that. And I always find it so interesting. Obviously we're technology solution providers, but so much of it is more than the tech, right? And I just find that fascinating because tech is an enabler. And there's all these other elements, like you said, the human component to it, where that's where I think the bench strength and how many resources can your solution partner bring to the table becomes instrumental in. Also the experience of the industry. There's so many nuances of life sciences. Derek, thank you for sharing that. I call it the trifecta. You have the tech, you have the domain expertise, and you have the support muscle. And we sure as hell are bringing that to the market. And the timing couldn't be more appropriate with everything changing. Derek, thank you so much for being on this episode with me. Every time I talk to you, I learn some more. And just to summarize for our audience, some of the key macro trends that we're seeing in the tech sphere are more consolidation, power of data, driving business decisions. And on the other side of that data is personalized, consumerized experiences so you can be closer to your end users and your stakeholders. And then we talked about the life sciences industry, how the macro trends are towards breaking down the silos and adopting technology to cut through the access issues, and overall being there for your stakeholders and thinking outside the box. Derek, final words to you. Over to you.
That was an amazing summary, Parth, and I just want to say thank you again. Both humbled and honored to join you and join this journey, and I'm excited for the future of ACTO.
Thank you, Derek, and excited for the future of healthcare and how we will be writing the future of drug and device promotion together. Thank you to our listeners. Until next time, this is the Launchpad Podcast, and I'm your host, Parth Khanna.
If you found value in our podcast and know of a change agent who is working to disrupt the life sciences industry, please nominate them using the form below.